Hello. This is a response to Brandon's video responding to my video about um, how what's often called the greatest strength of ENTPs, being able to kind of debate from a very analytical place and play devil's advocate and such, uh, might actually be a sign that that's an area for development or growth. Um, and Yeah, Brandon, I appreciate you making such a long, detailed video, really addressing everything I said and taking it all seriously. And um, yeah, this is an interesting process here. It's my first time having had uh, a detailed response video presented to me about a video that I made. So it's an interesting mix of feelings on topic, right? There's uh, yeah, part of me that feels very excited about being respected enough that you took this time to really engage with me to this degree. And there's a part of me that feels a little fear, a little discomfort here that I'm kind of being yeah, that my points are being disputed in this public arena. um, and uh, yeah, I notice that there is some of that kind of debater energy in me that wants to kind of prove you wrong and kind of go point by point and carefully address each one in the most convincing way possible. Um, and then there's this other part of me that feels like a more mature part that really just wants to be with this. Like, wow, here we are humaning together. And, yeah, I said a thing, then you said a thing back. And yeah, this doesn't need to be a debate. It doesn't need to be competitive or argumentative, or no one needs to prove anyone else wrong. Um, and yeah, I think this is kind of an interesting part of being human, that I get to notice all these feelings happening at once. And some of them are pleasant, like the excitingness, and some of them are a little more challenging, like noticing that fear or that constriction of like, oh no, did I do something wrong? Oh no, did I say the wrong thing? Um, and so I really appreciate that I've been developing this capacity to examine my emotional landscape in this detail. Um, yeah, so we're going to be talking more about feelings and emotions, but uh, I think that's just a good way for me to open, to just offer some vulnerability and really name the different feelings that I'm noticing, the different parts of me that are active here. Because I think that's really the truth of the human condition, that we're not just one thing. We all have many parts. And this is, the basis of parts theory in psychology and internal family systems. And I think there's a lot of power in that, in really owning that sense of not just being one solid fixed identity, but that we all have many identities that are kind of battling inside ourselves, and one's trying to protect the other, and so on. And so I think that this is one reason why I really advocate for fellow ENTPs to develop their capacity to notice and acknowledge their breadth and depth of feelings, because it allows you to see more of the truth of reality and more of the truth of yourself, to kind of peek beneath the surface at what is actually happening here, what is controlling me. Because I think that we like to think that it's our thoughts that are in charge, but really it's often the emotions that are in charge, or the feelings. That we can logically want something, or we can logically know that something is the good, the right thing to do, but our emotions and our feelings make it hard to act on that. They create these barriers for us, or these, yeah, just kind of this like storm to have to move through. And sometimes it's not conscious. Sometimes there is a powerful feeling there that is holding us back from doing the logical thing, and we don't really realize it unless we develop the capacity to be able to observe this landscape of what's happening. All right, so I I'm not going to, go point by point to address every single thing that you said, because otherwise our videos will just kind of keep increasing in length. But I did write down some notes as you were talking about some of the most important points that I think you made and I want to address. So I'll talk through some of those. And I want to start with just saying something about, it's tricky because I, as an ENTP, really do value being proven wrong, really value seeing all the sides of a conversation, all the different truths. And I see your truth and I respect your truth. And I also just want to name that, I do have some expertise in this realm. You mentioned that you're not an expert in psychology, and although I wouldn't call myself an expert in psychology, I do have 3 years of professional training in psychology, in Hakomi, which is a psychotherapeutic modality, and it is a somatic psychotherapeutic modality. So it is specifically focused on the body, somatic awareness, interoception, emotions, feelings, how the mind is organized. And so, I appreciate you explaining the difference between feelings and emotions and, how all that works. And yeah, I do have some expertise there actually. And so I've studied this in quite a bit of depth. And yeah, I don't want to appear arrogant either, but I do have substantial experience and expertise in coaching NTPs as well. A lot of pretty high profile, successful NTPs. And you mentioned at one point that I think in a comment maybe that it feels to you like an appeal to authority if I say that I have expertise in coaching NTPs, and I don't quite agree with that. I think if you're talking about appeal to authority as a cognitive bias, that's more saying we should trust that expert over there. Just because that person said this, we should believe it. And I think what I'm doing here is something a bit different. It's more I am stating my credibility markers, which I think is a very common thing to do in public speaking or teaching, to say, well, here's why you might consider trusting me. I do have some expertise. I have some significant training. I've studied psychology in quite depth at a professional level, and I am well regarded by a lot of successful people as an in-demand coach for ENTPs in particular. So again, I'm not saying that makes me an expert, that makes everything I say true, but I do think it's important to at least name that I think especially when it comes to personality typing, because there are a lot of people who have opinions on the internet, I do think it is important to separate the professionals from the lay people. And so again, I know I still have so much to learn, even after studying personality typing for over a decade. There's so much for me to learn, and I'm still learning all the time. But I do believe I'm at a certain level as well. Okay, so let's see. Take a look at my notes here. So I appreciate what you say about ENTPs. That it's a bit of a stereotype that we're debaters, that we always want to debate and play devil's advocate. And really what we're actually doing a lot of the time is just exploring ideas and kind of thinking out loud and figuring out where we stand on something by kind of trying it on, by speaking it. And I think that's true for sure. In fact, I think that checking your emotions as you're doing that exploring is a really valuable addition. It's kind of a level up. You could just be kind of thinking out loud to understand logically what seems most true. But if you pair that with examining your emotional landscape as you're speaking, as you're conversing with someone, as you're debating, for me, it's like you have, one layer is the logic, the the more objective, rational arguments, and then the emotions can kind of just illuminate more details. They can just kind of show you more that you wouldn't be able to see otherwise, more cues, because what's happening is, as you know, there are many parts of the brain that are all working, and there's a lot of wisdom in the subconscious as well, in the other parts of the neural network that are outside just the brain that lives in your head. There's this vast, complex kind of second brain that lives in your gut that's made up of the exact same type of neurons as in your brain. And so that part of you, that kind of second brain, has a whole lot of wisdom as well. And your whole nervous system is also full of neurons, and there's a lot of wisdom there. So noticing when your body reacts in certain ways, when you feel lighter, when you feel tighter, those give you all sorts of additional cues, additional data points to complement the logical data points. Yeah. So I think you kind of made this point in a few ways that if you're debating something that doesn't really matter to you, then it's easier to switch sides, to play devil's advocate, to not feel much. You can just kind of say anything and it doesn't really matter. But it becomes harder to do that if it matters, right? And then I think toward the end as well, you kind of said that, you often don't have strong opinions about things, you, Brandon. And so that's why you don't feel a lot sometimes, that you can just, be more analytical because it just doesn't matter. And I think that makes a lot of sense for sure. Yeah. The world is so complex today, so big, so many things happening in the news and everything, that most things really don't matter to us, shouldn't matter to us. There's just too much information to process. So I think the only way to survive really in today's world is to kind of block out a lot of things and say that only a smaller subset does matter. But in my experience coaching a lot of NTPs, I think a lot of NTPs really struggle for anything to matter. They struggle with nihilism and depression and just feeling like, even successful NTPs, like, yeah, I do great at work, I got promoted, I make a lot of money, and it's hard to feel like a lot of things in life matter. And I think, that is because they have been so conditioned to stay in their heads. Being so analytical is what has served them well for their whole lives. Being so smart, so intelligent, has what's allowed them to get those promotions, to make that money. And so they've kind of let that other part of themselves atrophy. They've focused on leveling up that mind part. And so the somatic awareness part and the emotion and feeling part has crumpled and it has numbed, and they have less access to it. And so I think that is a large part of why a lot of NTPs struggle with feeling that things matter. And so I think that's when I was saying that it's kind of being purely analytical about everything and not ever feeling triggered in debates can be a sign of less maturity. Or I think I probably shouldn't be using that word. It can be a sign that some of your tools have become rusty, right? That you're so used to using the tool of the analytical mind that if you're never feeling anything, if you're never feeling like, oh, this thing really matters to me, then I think it's a sign that some of those tools are rusty, and it would behoove you to take them out and sharpen them and keep them active. Yeah, and so, you were kind of saying that to you, practicing noticing how we feel during a debate is not very useful. And it seemed like you were kind of confused about why I think that's so useful. Is it just because I like feeling things? Sure, that's part of it, but I think it really is what I was saying earlier, that it's like there are these different data channels inside you. And if you're only paying attention to the one data channel of your mind, or perhaps, you have some emotional awareness, like you can feel like, okay, I'm angry right now, then yeah, you've got some access to that other data channel. But if you can really get in touch with much more nuanced body awareness, emotional awareness, exploring your whole feeling landscape, really understanding what your body's trying to tell you with different signals, then I think that really just gives you access to this whole new data set that you can factor into your decision making and your understanding of how you work and how the world works. And so, it's like really understanding, if we're talking about something right now and I feel afraid or I feel angry, that is a signal, that's an alert. The body doesn't speak English. The body speaks in emotions and feelings. And so if there's a sudden pang of anger, if you're talking and I suddenly feel my lip twitch, a micro expression, that's valuable information, right? I might not know exactly what it means in my logical mind in English. I might not be able to translate it perfectly, but I know, wow, my body is sending me a powerful signal through that lip twitch. It's saying something is important right now. Maybe one of my values is being trampled on. One of my boundaries is being pushed against. And I don't realize that logically. I don't realize that in thoughts. But that lip twitch tells me something. My body is trying to tell me something important. So that, I think, is the value of it. And, yeah, I think we've talked a bit in the comments as well about how I'm a type 5 in Enneagram, and so part of this for sure is more related to my type 5-ness than my ENTP-ness. But I think at the end of the day, it's really hard to separate. Like, there's so many different personality typing systems, and like you said, ADHD and different things as well. So, if I have these like 5 different personality types, plus factoring in different mental health conditions and all that, like, which part, if I'm struggling with something, which of these aspects of me is to blame? Is it because I'm an ENTP? Is it because I'm a 5? Is it because I have ADHD? Is it because I didn't get enough sleep? Like, who knows, right? It's interesting sometimes to try to tie it back. Like, where does this string go from this challenge to which personality typing system? And, that can be fun, but I think it's probably not super useful to say, like, to blame this on only because I'm a type 5, because I can tell you that having coached a lot of NTPs one-on-one, what I'm talking about is a very common challenge that a lot of NTPs come to me just being so in their heads and so out of touch with their bodies and their emotions. And I can tell you that when we work together for a while, it might be months later when we've been practicing these skills that they say, oh my God, like, I never realized how much additional information there is in my body. And people in my life are noticing the difference. Like, my partner, my friends are saying, like, wow, there's like this new sparkle to you. There's this new energy to you. There's this new, like, I can just tell you're so much more confident. You're so much more self-aware. I'm not sure what it is. And they tell me, well, it's because I'm aware of my feelings. So, yeah, I don't know how convincing that is to you, but I do have a lot of evidence from my coaching work that building this skill does help people a lot. And so, yeah, I think that there is the type 5 thing that makes this maybe a little more powerful and a little more important for me. But I do believe that a lot of NTPs actually have a kind of innate weakness in interoception, which is the kind of sense responsible for understanding what's happening inside your body. That might be related to kind of the baby SI function. Maybe not, who knows, but it's a pattern that I've noticed. Yeah, so you were saying that you believe that I probably want to share my feelings, not so much because it's important to be validated or to be seen, but because it's kind of thinking out loud again. And yeah, again, I agree that a lot of what we NTPs do, ENTPs especially, is we kind of taste our words as we're talking, just to figure out what we really believe. But I also believe, speaking from someone who's studied early childhood development, evolutionary psychology, different things, that humans really do have a very deep need for belonging, social acceptance, validation. One of our most core needs as humans, I think, is feeling like I'm okay. I'm worthy. I'm okay as I am. You accept me. And so if I'm struggling with some challenging feelings, I think that it is a very big need to just say, like, hey, here's my feeling. Can you validate me? Can you say that I'm okay? Can you say that what I'm feeling makes sense? Right? Can you see me in this state of fear, in this state of loneliness, whatever the struggle is? I think it makes sense that that's a need in and of itself. Yeah. So objectivity versus subjectivity. Yeah, I go into this a lot more in my follow-up video. And I think, you basically addressed it, that it depends what level of abstraction we're talking at, right? At one level, there are objective facts, for sure. At one level, objectively speaking, I'm holding a pen. Can't argue with that. At another level, what's a pen? There's atoms floating around. It's mostly empty space, right? At the quantum level, things are popping into and out of existence all the time, right? Where does my hand end and the pen begins? Like, yeah. And I know that probably seems ridiculous to evoke that level of abstraction, but I do think it's reasonable to say that it's not completely obvious to just say that things can be purely objective, because I do think that at a core level, everything is processed through our sensory apparatus. The brain is sitting in a black box. Literally everything you know about how reality works, all the laws of physics, the fact that any other humans exist out there outside of you, all of that you only know because it came in through your senses and was processed through your particular nervous system, your optic nerve, your auditory nerve, your particular brain, right? So that sounds pretty subjective to me, right? Like, truly, if you really think about it, you can't know anything other than what you've heard, what you've seen, and how it's been processed through your brain. And we all just have such different brains. Yeah, but I think probably a better way of putting this, because I know that probably just seems like needlessly philosophical. I think a better way of putting this is to every personality type, certain things are so obvious. Certain things are so natural, right? And so to us, to we ENTPs, I think that it is so built in, it is so obvious, it is so natural for us to be objective and to favor objectivity, right? Like, so much of my life I've spent in that place of just trying to find what is objectively true. Even everything I just said about being processed through the nervous system and everything, younger Michael would have said, sure, but, what if we could install tiny nano cameras observing every little molecule, and, surely there's an objective truth, right? And so my point here is that what I'm talking about is my growth path and the growth path of most NTPs. And so if I were talking to a type that is less rational, if if I were talking to a type that is more prone to getting lost in overly exuberant emotions that are not grounded in reality, if I were talking to that type, I would argue objectivity is so important. You should be objective. You should double check all the facts. You should not rely on your emotions. You should, objectivity is the most important thing. The facts are the most important thing. Logic is the most important thing, right? And if I were arguing with a flat earther, if someone who's denying climate change, all sorts of things like that, I would argue objectivity, facts, logic. But in my video, I was speaking as an ENTP to fellow ENTPs. So I was speaking at a different level. I was saying, like, it's kind of like, if you're talking to someone who grew up in the Arctic and you say, I'm cold, right? Like, that's going to mean something completely different to them than if you say to someone who grew up in Hawaii. And so when I'm talking about try to focus more on subjectivity and feelings than objectivity and logic, I'm speaking from the place of someone who's been obsessed with objectivity and logic. So it's kind of like saying, don't, it's like, it's not saying like black and white, you should go from black all the way to white. I'm saying you should go from black to some more gray. Does that make sense? Hopefully. All right. So I do think that we largely agree about what is objective versus subjective. We're just focusing more on maybe different levels of abstraction. And anyway, that's probably enough on that topic. All right, we're nearing the end here. Yeah, so you said that maybe it's that I like just kind of feeling more alive if I feel more of my feelings. Yeah, absolutely. That has been a very big journey that I've been on for the past 7 or 8 years, moving from a place of a lot more nihilism and depression and very strong atheism, very strong scientific materialism, just never trusting anything spiritual, anything vaguely woo-woo, just pure science, pure logic. That was me for most of my life. And again, I am the furthest thing from anti-science, anti-logic. I am so grounded in those realms still, but I've added on to that this deep appreciation for exploring more spiritual realms, exploring more feelings realms. And so I have been able to feel a lot more alive by tapping into more body awareness, by learning to dance more, to sing more, to enjoy my body more. I used to have this story that I just can't dance. I'm not a dancer. That's for feeling types or S types. I'm a mind person. And so it has been really enlivening for me to decide, wait, that was a limiting belief. I can be a mind person and a body person. I can be a thinker and a feeler. And I've seen that be really liberating for a lot of NTPs that I've worked with, to realize that, you can be a thinker and you're going to feel even more alive if you can tap into these other parts of you. It was interesting. One of the parts that you seemed most disbelieving of was when I said something like that, kind of regularly repressing feelings of fear or anger or not being with them fully would lead to chronic stress in the body. Or chronic tension in the body, rather. And you said, says who? And I would invite you to just, do some Googling and, ask ChatGPT. And I think it could give you a lot of great specific studies that talk about this stuff. one name to start with is Peter Levine. He's done a lot of research in this domain. Another book is The Body Keeps the Score. It's a really powerful, very deep dive, very well researched into how tension is stored in the body from trauma. And trauma doesn't have to just be the big things. There can be micro traumas as well. And I would argue that if you are feeling a lot of feelings regularly, these kind of negative, challenging feelings like fear or anger, and you don't take them seriously, you don't be with them, you kind of push them aside, then that is a kind of micro trauma that will be stored in your nervous system. And, that, again, I know something about this because Hakomi is a modality that is really oriented around exploring how someone is wired in their particular brain and nervous system to figure out how they have stored tension in the body and have stored these kind of challenging memories or challenging experiences that have organized their mind in a certain way that has created these habits and patterns and behaviors that are not serving them. And a lot of that is unconscious. They don't really realize how this stuff that's stored in them is leading them to do things that are not serving them. And so that's a lot of what we do in Hakomi is try to kind of follow that down into where does that live in you so that we can kind of shift it and, wire a new neural pathway. Because right now you're used to going down that default one all the time. But if we can kind of notice where that's stored and then create a new pathway and train you to go down this new one, then that can eventually become your new default. Yeah, and so I guess the last point here is about, it seemed like if I understood you right, maybe you also didn't really believe that it's kind of possible for you to think that you're being logical, but to be, unbeknownst to you, kind of controlled by feelings or emotions. That what you think is logic is actually being colored by this other part of you. But it seems like you do partially believe that, at least, because you mentioned like a fear of flying, right? And so I think that's an example where logically you know that flying is one of the safest forms of travel, right? You can look up all the stats and see, logically speaking, I should actually fly instead of drive. And yet you still have this kind of irrational fear come up in your body because you're afraid of heights, right? And so, I guess I would say, like, well, you know that about yourself, but what if you had an experience with heights when you were very young? You don't really remember that, but it evoked a lot of fear in your body that was kind of stored in your nervous system somewhere. And so when you're up in the plane, or when you're thinking about booking a flight, you feel this kind of irrational fear come up. You're not really sure what's going on. Or rather, I guess the point I should make is that if you notice yourself thinking like, I should book a flight, but I don't really want to, I'm not really sure why, I'm going to book a train instead. That would be a case, I think, where there is something underneath that is coloring your decision there. You don't consciously realize why you chose the train instead. It seemed to you, I think what would actually happen is your mind would create a story. Maybe your thoughts would tell you like, oh, the train schedule actually works better for me. And, oh, the TSA is so much trouble. I want to avoid all that crap. I'm just going to take the train. So your brain would create this logical sequence of thoughts saying you're taking the train because the schedule fits better and it's less hassle. But what you don't realize is actually that decision was colored by this childhood experience you had that created this fear in your body that colored that decision-making process. And so I think that is really the value. I know you are also someone who really values self-awareness and truth and accuracy. And so to me, that is Um, this is why understanding your feelings landscape and subconscious and body are ways of getting at more accuracy, more accurate understanding of how you work, how you make decisions, where your thoughts are coming from, if all your thoughts are true or not, right? So that is why, in my coaching practice, I call this full stack human, that you're kind of getting all these layers together. It's not just the mind, it's also the body awareness, the feelings, and so on, so that with all of that together, you can be a full stack human who is using the whole stack, not just kind of the front end interface of the analytical thoughts, but all these deeper parts as well that can better inform you to understand why you came to that decision, and that perhaps you can make better decisions in the future if you're more aware of these other parts of you. All right. Thanks again for engaging. And thanks to everyone who's watching, and I hope you all have a great day.